The day my parents threw me out for accepting a full-time job, they told everyone I had abandoned the family. I didn't argue. I simply picked up my suitcase, walked past my younger siblings standing silently in the hallway, and closed the front door behind me. By sunset, my phone was flooded with angry messages from relatives calling me selfish, ungrateful, and heartless. According to my parents, I had chosen money over family after they had sacrificed everything to raise me. What none of them knew was that I had spent years raising my siblings while my parents treated me like unpaid help. Every school morning, every doctor's appointment, every homework session, every dinner, I handled it all. I wasn't their sister anymore. I was their live-in nanny without a paycheck, a day off, or even a simple thank you. As I stood outside with 2 bags at my feet, I could still hear my mother crying loudly for the neighbors to hear. She abandoned her own family. My father folded his arms and looked at me without a trace of regret. "If you can work for strangers," he said coldly, "then you don't deserve to live under this roof." I met his eyes for only a second. Then I quietly turned around and walked away. I never defended myself, because I already had something far more powerful than an argument. I had years of proof, and I knew the truth would eventually speak much louder than I ever could. I was 26 when everything finally collapsed, but the truth was that my childhood had ended long before that. As the oldest of 4 children, I slowly became the person everyone depended on. At first, it sounded temporary. Just watch them for an hour. Help with dinner tonight. Pick them up from school this week. Those small favors quietly became my entire life. By the time I graduated from college, I wasn't building a future. I was maintaining someone else's. I woke up before sunrise to prepare breakfasts and lunches, got my siblings dressed, walked the youngest to school, cleaned the house, cooked dinner, helped with homework, and stayed awake until everyone else had gone to bed. My parents both worked, but once they came home, they acted as though their responsibilities had ended while mine had only begun. Whenever relatives praised me for being such a caring daughter, my mother would smile proudly and say, "She's just helping the family." It sounded generous. In reality, I had no weekends, no vacations, and no freedom to make plans without asking permission first. I stopped accepting invitations from friends because I already knew the answer would be no. Birthdays, weddings, even simple coffee meetups disappeared from my life. After enough cancellations, people stopped asking altogether. The painful part wasn't the workload. It was realizing that my efforts had become invisible. If dinner was ready on time, no one noticed. If the house stayed spotless, it was expected. But if I forgot one errand or came home 10 minutes late, I was reminded how selfish I had become. My younger siblings never treated me badly. They were children doing what children naturally do, depending on the person who was always there. I never blamed them. They hadn't chosen this arrangement any more than I had. Deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I just kept convincing myself that if I worked harder, sacrificed more, and stayed patient, eventually my parents would appreciate everything I had given up. Instead, they began acting as though I owed them even more. The disrespect never arrived as one explosive moment. It came in quiet, ordinary ways that were easy for everyone else to dismiss, but impossible for me to forget. If I mentioned being tired, my father would barely look up from the television before saying, "You're young. You'll survive." When I talked about applying for jobs, my mother would smile without warmth and reply, "Your family needs you more than some company ever will." At family gatherings, relatives praised my parents for raising such responsible children. I stood beside the kitchen sink washing dishes, while my mother accepted every compliment with a grateful smile. She never mentioned that I had cooked the meal, cleaned the house, or spent the entire morning making sure everything looked perfect before the guests arrived. The pattern repeated itself for years. Whenever my younger siblings earned good grades, my parents proudly claimed they had guided them every step of the way. They never mentioned the late nights I spent explaining math problems, editing essays, or calming anxious tears before exams. The hardest moments were the quiet ones. Sometimes I would walk into the living room carrying a basket of folded laundry, and the conversation would stop just long enough for someone to ask me to refill a drink or bring more snacks. No one asked me to sit down. No one noticed I hadn't rested all day. One evening, I overheard my parents talking after they thought I had gone to bed. "As long as she lives here," my father said calmly, "we'll never have to pay for childcare." My mother laughed softly. "Why would she leave? She knows we need her." I stood frozen in the hallway. my hand gripping the laundry basket so tightly my fingers ached. For the first time, I realized they weren't grateful for my sacrifices. They had simply built their entire lifestyle around them. From that night forward, I stopped seeing myself as a daughter who was helping her family. I started seeing myself as someone whose kindness had quietly become an unpaid obligation. And once that realization settled in, I began paying much closer attention to everything they said, and everything they assumed I would never question. The turning point didn't happen because of one cruel comment. It happened because, for the first time, I was offered a glimpse of a different life. A company I had interviewed with months earlier called unexpectedly. They offered me a full-time position with steady pay, health benefits, and room to grow. The hiring manager said, "We were impressed by your organizational skills and reliability. We'd love to have you on the team." I thanked her and accepted before fear could talk me out of it. That evening, I sat my parents down at the kitchen table. I expected disappointment. Instead, I was met with silence so cold it made the room feel smaller. My father leaned back in his chair. "So," he said evenly, "who's supposed to take care of your siblings?" "I'll help where I can," I answered calmly. "But I can't keep doing this full time. I need to build my own future." My mother's expression hardened. "After everything we've done for you," she whispered, "this is how you repay us?" For a moment, I almost apologized out of habit. Then I looked around the room. The chore chart on the refrigerator was written entirely in my handwriting. The family calendar was filled with appointments I had scheduled. School permission slips carried my signature because I was always the one available. Every corner of that house reflected years of my invisible work. I suddenly understood something that changed everything. They weren't upset because I had betrayed them. They were upset because they were losing someone who had been doing the work they never wanted to do themselves. That realization erased every ounce of guilt I had been carrying. I accepted the job without looking back. 2 days later, they packed my belongings into garbage bags, left them on the front porch, and told me not to come back until I remembered where my real responsibilities were. As I loaded the bags into my car, I didn't argue or raise my voice. I simply took one last look at the house, knowing they believed they had won. They had no idea I had spent years quietly saving text messages, schedules, emails, receipts, and records that told a very different story. For the first time in my life, I wasn't planning to endure. I was preparing to tell the truth. I made one promise to myself the day I left. I would never try to win by being louder than my parents. If the truth was on my side, I didn't need to argue. I only needed to organize it. My new job demanded attention and discipline, but every evening, I spent an hour gathering the pieces of my past. Years of responsibility had left a paper trail that my parents had completely overlooked. I downloaded old family group chats where my mother instructed me to pick up the children, attend parent-teacher conferences, and cancel my own plans because she and my father were too busy. I saved text messages reminding me to buy groceries with my own money and screenshots of bank transfers showing I had paid for school supplies, medicine, and utility bills whenever my parents came up short. My work background had taught me how to organize information clearly. I created dated folders, matched receipts to messages, and built a simple timeline showing exactly who had been responsible for the children on any given day. There were school emails addressed to me, medical appointment confirmations with my phone number, and permission forms carrying my signature instead of either parent's. I wasn't preparing for a lawsuit or some dramatic confrontation. I was preparing for the moment someone asked a simple question. "Do you have proof?" I wanted the answer to be immediate. Meanwhile, I said nothing publicly. When relatives posted comments about how I had walked away from my family, I ignored them. I didn't defend myself, correct anyone, or hint that I knew the truth. My silence made my parents more confident. They repeated the same story so often that they stopped worrying about whether anyone would question it. Then I heard through one of my cousins that my parents had hired a full-time nanny only days after forcing me out. I wasn't surprised. What caught my attention was something else. The nanny resigned less than 3 weeks later. For the first time, people outside the family were beginning to see what I had lived with for years. I didn't need to expose my parents immediately. I only needed to wait until the right moment, when the evidence would confirm what others had already started to suspect. The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. One Sunday afternoon, my aunt organized a large family gathering. I almost declined, knowing exactly how the conversation would go. Then she sent one message that changed my mind. I think it's time everyone hears both sides. When I arrived, the room fell strangely quiet. My parents were already there, and I noticed several relatives avoiding my eyes. My mother sighed dramatically and said, "It's nice you finally remembered your family." I smiled politely and took a seat. For nearly 10 minutes, they repeated the same story they had been telling for weeks. According to them, I had abandoned my siblings the moment I found a better opportunity. My father even claimed they had been forced to hire a nanny because I had left them with no warning. Then my uncle turned to me. "Is any of this true?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I placed a neatly organized folder on the coffee table and slid it toward him. "Please start with the first page." The room became silent except for the sound of paper turning. There were screenshots of years of messages, assigning me every parental responsibility. Receipts showed I had paid for groceries, school uniforms, and medical expenses. School records listed me as the emergency contact. Calendar entries documented thousands of hours spent raising children, who weren't mine to raise. No one interrupted. The final page contained a message from the nanny they had hired after I left. She had resigned after just 18 days, explaining that the workload was far beyond what one person could reasonably handle. The same duties my parents had described, as a little help had driven a paid professional to quit in less than 3 weeks. My mother reached for the folder, but my uncle gently held onto it. "No," he said quietly. "We're still reading." For the first time, my parents had nothing to say. I hadn't embarrassed them with accusations. I had simply replaced their story with the truth. And once everyone saw the evidence for themselves, the lies collapsed without me saying another word. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. One by one, my relatives closed the folder and looked at my parents with expressions I had never seen before. It wasn't anger at first. It was disbelief. They had spent weeks judging me, only to realize they had believed a carefully crafted lie. My aunt quietly apologized. "I should have called you before assuming the worst," she said. A few others followed. Some admitted they had sent hurtful messages. Others confessed they had stopped speaking to me because they thought I had selfishly abandoned my younger siblings. I accepted every apology with the same calm response. "I'm just glad you know the truth now." My parents tried to defend themselves, saying they had only expected me to help a little, but the evidence spoke louder than their explanations ever could. Years of schedules, receipts, school records, and messages painted a picture that no excuse could erase. Within days, their reputation changed. Family members who had once praised them for their parenting began asking uncomfortable questions. Some quietly distanced themselves. Others offered to help my younger siblings directly instead of relying on my parents' version of events. The biggest change, however, happened inside me. For the first time in years, I woke up without rushing to make breakfast for 6 people. I came home from work to an apartment that was peaceful instead of demanding. I could read a book without feeling guilty, meet friends without asking permission, and plan my future without wondering who would stop me. I also realized something important. People often tell you that keeping the peace means staying silent, but real peace doesn't come from accepting mistreatment. It comes from knowing your worth and refusing to let others rewrite your story. That was why this mattered. Not because I wanted revenge, but because every person who has ever been taken for granted deserves to know that the truth doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the strongest victory is simply letting the facts speak until no lie is left standing. Months have passed since that afternoon, and my life is almost unrecognizable, not because something extraordinary happened, but because I finally learned what an ordinary, peaceful life feels like. My career continues to grow. For the first time, I'm saving money for goals that belong to me. Instead of constantly solving someone else's problems, I rented a brighter apartment, started taking weekend trips, and even rediscovered hobbies I had forgotten I loved. Every small decision reminds me that my time is finally my own. My younger siblings still call me. I never punished them for choices they didn't make. We meet for lunch, celebrate birthdays together, and talk honestly about the future. As they've grown older, they've begun to understand what really happened. I never encouraged them to resent our parents. I simply answered their questions with the same truth I had shown everyone else, with patience instead of bitterness. My parents have reached out more than once. The first message blamed me. The second asked if I could help out for a little while. The third simply said, "Please come home." We need you. I read every message without anger. Then I quietly put my phone away. I had already spent years confusing guilt with love, obligation with family, and sacrifice with self-worth. I wasn't willing to make that mistake again. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always mean returning to the place that hurt you. Sometimes it means letting go of the anger while refusing to step back into the same cycle. Looking back, I don't feel proud because my parents' lies were exposed. I feel proud because I never became like them. I never shouted. I never lied. I never tried to destroy them. I simply refused to let them define me. People often believe revenge is about making someone suffer. I learned it's something much quieter than that. It's building a life so full of peace, purpose, and dignity that the people who underestimated you are left standing outside it, realizing too late what they lost. And sometimes, the strongest goodbye is the one you never have to say because your silence has already closed the door behind you.